Organizations often claim to prioritize employee mental wellness. In fact, it's very de jour for an organization to provide a wellness week or a mental health day off. But what's ironic and sad is how few organizations truly prioritize the mental well-being of their employees. Many organizations, in fact, grind their employees to dust in pursuit of missions and visions that support stakeholders, as if the stakeholders' needs prioritize the employees' needs for wellness and recovery. Full disclosure, I live with mental illness. And while it's still heavily stigmatized to talk about this openly in public, I know that I'm not alone. The CDC estimates that 1 in every 5 adults in the US will be diagnosed with a mental illness. So for me, what that means is that millions of other people are walking around with invisible illnesses. I would argue that every US employer probably employs someone with mental illness, whether they know it or not. And I'm among this group. I've dedicated my career to supporting vulnerable populations, whether that's at-risk youth, first-generation college students, adults with autism and developmental disabilities, or individuals with mental illness. I found that centering my work on amplifying the voices of others has been helpful in me managing my own. When I started work with one particular organization, I was very optimistic that I'd be doing excellent work on behalf of worthy stakeholders. Of course, as soon as I disclosed my disability, the tide turned. First, it was my supervisor tutting at a midday doctor's appointment, asking if it was really necessary for me to use my leave. Then it progressed to conversations about how my personality was affecting colleagues. And finally, it culminated in my supervisor asking to be CC'd on every email that I sent. It was micromanagement that I had never encountered before. And knowing that I had to manage my own symptoms, it was driving me to a really dark place. And I confided in one of my colleagues that I was feeling rather suicidal. When Human Resources caught wind of that, instead of offering to support me, I was immediately placed on administrative leave. And I was told that I needed to get my condition evaluated by their employee assistance program. Of course, when I called the employee assistance program and told them my diagnosis, they said, "Oh, well, you have a private therapist, so we can't interfere." I was left in limbo. And though I had very little communication with my employer during that time, I was given paperwork that I could complete to request workplace accommodations. I always found it interesting that the onus is on us to demonstrate the legitimacy of our accommodations. And so with the help of my healthcare team and my family, I came up with a few accommodations that I thought would be particularly helpful. Specifically, I asked to be able to work outside of core business hours, because knowing my moods, I thought I would be better able to manage my workload if I wasn't tied to the 9 to 5. I also requested flexible use of leave, because the company had a policy that leave could only be used in 4-hour increments. And a midday doctor's appointment doesn't need 4 hours, especially if I'm virtual. When I got back to work, I had a meeting with HR wherein all my requested accommodations were flatly denied. I was told that they all presented an undue burden. I was told further that because my job required answering crisis callers on the phone, that I would have to be available during core business hours. I wasn't a phone operator. I never answered calls during my workday. Yet this false understanding of my job informed HR that I wanted to check out at any time, and they denied all my accommodations. So feeling utterly discriminated against, I filed a claim with the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. I was expected to return to business as usual, and very soon business as usual brought me back to the precipice. So I took 3 days off to recalibrate, and in that time requested short-term disability from the organization so that I could reclaim my wellness. 3 days later, I returned to work to find a noon meeting with Human Resources on my calendar, and at noon that day I was given my pink slip. A few moments after the shock of being fired wore off, and fueled by righteous indignation, mind you, I went back to the EEOC and filed a second claim, this time for retaliation. My employer was charged within a few weeks of my termination with both discrimination and retaliation. Several months later, I faced the same HR officer who had denied all my accommodations flatly, faced them and the organization's white shoe attorney, where we negotiated a settlement that presented 6 ten-thousandths of their budget. My lawyer advised me that I could pursue further legal action if I chose, but that it might take 2 to 3 years before anything was settled. I knew that had I had the opportunity to accuse this organization publicly of discrimination and retaliation against me, a person with mental illness, it would be impossible for them to continue doing their work, but I couldn't stomach the idea of letting these insouciant supervisors live in my brain rent-free for 2 to 3 more years. I recognize, of course, that mine is just one story. Discrimination and retaliation for disclosing mental illness is happening everywhere. In fact, I was speaking to a group of US government employees, and I received an email from one who said that they cannot see a therapist because if they have to do a background check and they see a therapist, their background check will be denied and they won't be able to keep their job. In the federal government, it's still a red flag to disclose your mental illness. So I know that this is happening to millions of people, and it's caused me to vociferously advocate for people like me, because I'm of the opinion that each of us is capable of tremendous things when given the latitude. I think we need workplaces that work for us. I was eavesdropping on a social media conversation where someone said, "How should I disclose my bipolar disorder to my supervisor?" And the echo of responses said, "Don't disclose." These were all people who were peers of mine. This was on a website called themighty.com, which is a mental health periodical. And the audience was outspoken. Do not disclose. Manage and mask the best you can, because as soon as your employer finds out that you have bipolar disorder, they'll find a way to get you out. And so thinking from the mind of my peers, thinking, how can we make this world more accommodating, safer for us, knowing that there are millions of people like me who are managing mental illness? I think there are 3 core things that people in leadership positions need to adopt, 3 perspectives. The first is that leaders need to fight their own stigma and bias. It starts with them. It starts internally. Social media and popular media hasn't necessarily been kind to people with mental health conditions. It hasn't been the friendliest. I think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as an example, right? In the media, we're made out to be terrifying, vulnerable, unstable, and that's just not the case. I don't stand before you today a monster foaming at the mouth. I'm a person, navigating ups and downs like anybody else. And so leaders, people in positions of authority need to understand that when someone discloses a disability like a mental illness, the leader needs to stop and pause and not project whatever stigma they may be carrying or whatever fear or bias they may be carrying, because it's natural to be afraid of things you don't understand. The challenge is not to act from that place of fear and instead adopt understanding. The second step is to apply accommodations from a universal design perspective. This image, when you search universal design, this image comes up. And you see it's steps with a railing and a ramp. I think when I think of universal design, I think of, for example, a curb cut in a sidewalk, right? The curb cut was designed to help wheelchair users navigate, but it also helps parents pushing strollers. It also helps people with limited functionality of their legs. It also helps people on bicycles, skateboards, roller skates, right? It's a universal design. There are certain workplace accommodations that benefit everybody. One, having an agenda for every meeting, letting people know ahead of time what they're going to be talking about, and following meetings with notes that are circulated around for everybody. Lets people know what was discussed, what was important. Another accommodation could be making sure that any verbal directions are followed in writing. It's not just going to help people with mental health conditions, it's going to help people with ADHD, it's going to help people with processing disorder. Just having directions in writing, knowing what's expected of you. Think about how many meetings we go into where we have no idea what they're going to talk about. Like the HR meeting I had on my day back. Having an agenda ahead of time is an accommodation that's universally beneficial. And the third, I would say, mindset for leaders to adopt is recognizing that in order to learn, we have to remain humble. There's a saying in the mental health community that when you've met one person with mental illness, you've met one person with mental illness. You can't extrapolate from a single experience and assume that symptoms are the same or that solutions are the same. Everyone's managing their own condition individually, and individualized approaches are necessary. And the humility to recognize that I don't know everything. I can't know everything. I have to learn. I have to be open to it. I know these three things are not easy asks: the ability to fight bias and stigma, the ability to apply universal design principles, and the ability to assume the position of a humble learner. These are not easy asks. But it's well beyond time for individuals with mental illness to be accommodated in their workplaces. It's well beyond time for work to work for us, instead of us having to mask and lie to make it through the day. So I'm looking forward to a day when I don't have to be afraid of disclosing. I'm looking forward to a day where I can bring my whole self to work and achieve the great things I know I'm capable of achieving, because we all deserve that. Thank you.